Good morning, everyone. Hello, I'm Mark Leach. I'm editor of Wonkhe, the website and think tank about higher education here in the UK. It's a really exciting day. The opening of CG couldn't be more timely. Both in the UK and around the world, universities have never been more important and at the same time never faced such complicated challenges. I couldn't think of a more appropriate way of tackling them collectively than starting the biggest research centre of its kind in the world with some of the best researchers in their field and more support and goodwill from different quarters than for anything quite like this I've seen before. And more importantly, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say, I really hope you're going to tell us what on earth is going on. But we'll get to that, I hope. We've got an awful lot to pack in today, so let's get started. Please tweet #CGLaunch, and just a quick reminder, we're being filmed and live streamed, and there's a photographer in the room. In case you're wondering, CG has a silent H like Wonkhe. Acronym police are standing by, so you'll need to pronounce it correctly if you want to ask a question. For our first session this morning, I'd like to welcome CG's principal, funders and supporters. And to kick us off, we have Andrew Brown, Acting Director of UCL Institute of Education. Andrew.
It's a great pleasure for me to be able to welcome you on behalf of the UCL Institute of Education to the launch event of the Centre for Global Higher Education, as Mark has said, CG from here on in. And we have Mark and I think Wonkhe to blame for that. It's never been more important to understand higher education in a global context. International comparisons which accentuate global competition, not just for status but for the best students and the most talented staff, are just one small part of this. Increasingly, collaboration across geopolitical, systemic and disciplinary boundaries are prerequisite for addressing grand challenges and wicked problems, and for securing the funding to do this work. Local labour markets at all levels morph and blend into international occupational fields. Increasingly mobile workforces through, for instance, migration, challenge the capacity and ability for higher education institutions which themselves become increasingly diverse. It's a complex intellectual field with direct articulation with policy and practice at every level. And apposite, that we're launching today a major social science research centre in this field. At the heart of the centre's work is not just the development of a programme of high quality research, but the desire to have real impact on policy and practice. This entails the engagement of key stakeholders from the very start in the formulation of questions, in the design and conduct of studies, as well as the critical scrutiny of outcomes and the translation and mobilization of new knowledge. And that started now with 21 associate organizations already signed up to work with and be an integral part of the centre, including the NUS and University UK. And it's evident in the composition of the participants here today and the orientations of the research planned for the centre. 15 projects planned initially in 3 programme streams, focusing on local, national and international dimensions of higher education. And indeed, this is evident in the programme over these coming 2 days. The Centre also has a deep commitment to partnership and, of course, as befitting of its inherently international concerns, it's on a global scale. UK partners, UCL IOE, Sheffield and Lancaster, will work closely with partners in Japan, China, Hong Kong, Australia, USA, South Africa, Ireland and the Netherlands. And I'm sure that those networks will extend ever greater as the projects proceed. Locating the centre at the UCL IOE enables the centre not only to draw on our involvement in all phases of education and educational research, but also our expertise and standing in social science more widely, and our highly developed international networks. And it brings experience and commitment to professional practice and through the development of high quality teaching and learning in higher education and in research. There must be a high degree of reflexivity in any such undertaking, and the benefits of the centre to UCL in meeting its aspirations as London's global university will be immense. It's an exciting journey. But it is just the beginning. The ESRC and HEFCE, the major funders of the centre, have shown great foresight in supporting the centre, and we thank them for that. But it's now up to us to meet the high expectations of everyone involved and create something that's sustainable over the longer term, beyond the funding, and that will have enduring impact and create a new generation of researchers and practitioners. So I expect an invitation to the 10th, possibly the 15th anniversary of the centre. So I'd like then to welcome you all to participation in this launch event on behalf of the UCL Institute of Education, and wish you a productive and stimulating 2 days, and of course an extended engagement and involvement with the centre, CG, in the years to come. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Chris Millward from HEFCE, one of the principal funders of CG.
I mean, firstly, congratulations to Simon, colleagues at Institute of Education and UCL and all the other participants on securing the funding and getting the centre up and running. I know from having been involved in both stages of the assessment process how competitive it was, and also what a distinctive offer this centre provided, both in terms of the range of expertise gathered from not just across the UK but around the world, but also the conceptual underpinning, bringing together local, national and global perspectives on HE. Needless to say, as has been said already, this is an exceptionally lively climate for policy in higher education in England. We have a green paper from the government which could well lead to legislation and inevitable parliamentary scrutiny and debate and wider public debate. And that, of course, raises quite fundamental questions about higher education. For example, whether and how we can understand the effect of markets and consumerism in higher education. For example, with regard to the curriculum and the relationships between staff and students and institutions. The interaction between teaching and research within the umbrella of a university, the notion of social mobility and the extent to which higher education has positive or negative effects on that, the nature of graduate skills and capabilities and how they interact with local and national and international labour markets and economies, and perhaps most fundamentally what it means to be called a university, and to award a university degree and what protections there should be around that. And of course the Green Paper also opens up questions around university autonomy, and it refers to academic freedom and what the role of the state should be by reference to that. This is of course the fourth set of reforms in my career, so back to 97 and Deering in England, and many people of here will have experienced a lot more, and the long view on this is clearly important. It's also worth saying that these issues are not just of concern in this country, but they're highly pertinent throughout the world. We have a distinctively international HE system in this country, massive staff and student mobility, but also significant presence of English higher education, UK higher education overseas. I think more UK degrees awarded overseas than here. But beyond that, higher education is now so central to the ambitions of individuals and families, of local and national governments throughout the world, that these kind of questions that we're raising here are pertinent elsewhere as well. So what does this mean for the centre? Well, firstly, this is clearly, higher education is clearly so central, it's clearly fertile territory for interdisciplinary and international research, and that is exactly what the centre is here for. Secondly, in addressing the quite fundamental questions that I've highlighted earlier, we really need to bring to bear the best expertise, a theoretical knowledge and underpinning, and rigorous research. And again, that's where we expect the centre and its expertise to make a substantial contribution. I'm struck in this context by one of the things that was said, I think, in the initial proposal for the centre, which was that it may be perceived in this country that policy and practice has moved faster than theory, and there is a need to rebalance that in order to get coherent thinking, and I think that's a key role for this centre. So HEFCE is delighted to support the centre. We are not just a funder, we're also a collaborator, and we will be involved in a number of the projects during the coming 5 years. I hope that the conference this week is a great success, and of course the centre is a success during the coming years. So good luck for the coming days. Thank you.
So I'd like to welcome Phil Sooben, Deputy Chief Executive of ESRC, the other main funder of CG.
Okay, thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. Just very quickly, for those of you who, I suspect the majority of you are familiar with ESRC, who don't know very much about us, we're one of the currently 7 research councils in the UK and the largest public funder of social science research. We support, I suppose, what you might call a portfolio of investments, so responsive grants, studentships, investing in infrastructure, but also in what we call strategic research investments, of which CG is one. So the quick history here is that our council decided that there was something of a dearth in our current portfolio around higher education a couple of years ago, and agreed that this should be one of the highlight themes in the competition we ran for centres and large grants in 2014-15, with the title The Future of Higher Education. Now, I must admit, at the time I thought we need to be careful here. There's a risk that this could be caricatured as a group of senior academics deciding to fund a programme of research looking at itself. And I think I'm pleased to say that looking now at the sort of breadth of important questions that are going to be addressed by the centre, the range of topics that are going to be covered, I think those concerns have certainly been dispelled. This looks to me like a very wide-ranging, ambitious and exciting programme of work. If I just say a little bit about, I think, what we are looking to get from the centre, and I sort of hang it on ESRC's sort of corporate mantra, if you like, our core values, which we all recite at our desks every morning, of quality, impact and independence. And I'm expecting that the centre will sort of tick all 3 of those boxes with aplomb. I mean, in terms of the quality, I'm sure you don't need me to remind you that ESRC funding competitions are highly competitive. They are based on rigorous peer review and generally low success rates. So I think to come through that process and to have been successful is in itself a quite substantial achievement for the centre. And as I look at just the names of the individuals leading the different programmes and projects, it seems evident to me that the centre will deliver a wide range of very high quality work. In terms of the impact, I think what's particularly striking to us is the promise of impact both globally and within the UK. I mean, clearly there are very strong links here across Europe, North America and beyond, and that there should be real international collaboration and impact with the programme of research. I'm particularly pleased to see the emphasis on comparative research, of which I think there probably isn't sufficient across UK social science at the moment. But I think also within a UK context, I was very pleased to see the centre's emphasis on looking at and being sensitive to policy differences within the UK. ESRC is a funder with a UK-wide remit, and I think we have substantial investments and good relations with colleagues in Scotland and Wales. I think we're very sensitive to the policy differences between the different countries within the UK. So I think that's another important dimension to the research. Of course, it's worth noting that in terms of the potential impact of this work, the research councils themselves, and indeed our parent department in Whitehall, BIS, are likely to be significant users and beneficiaries of the work that is going to be carried out. I'm particularly struck by the concept of associate organisations, the partner organisations that will be working closely with CG as the programme develops. I think that really should increase the potential for having an impact on the policy agenda in the wider world. It's a key objective for ESRC to make the best use of social science research and the evidence from it to inform policy and practice. And there are clearly very strong opportunities here around a whole range of issues, some of which have been mentioned already by the first two speakers in terms of widening participation, links with industry, which is a particular hot topic, I think, for the research councils at the moment. Student funding, and particularly how that links in with the current debates around postgraduate loans, as well as support at undergraduate levels, and the questions around the future academic workforce. I note that the Times Higher is one of the Centre's associate organisations. I think that's very welcome. It should be an effective way of reaching out to and informing the higher education community itself. I certainly look forward to reading about progress on a regular basis. It did just occur to me we better try and avoid getting on the back page too often. And finally, as I said, the ESRC's sort of mantra is quality, impact and independence. I think my final point is that independence is crucial, as it is to all of the research that we support. The credibility of the research itself, I think, depends on it being seen as impartial from vested interests, whether that's government, business, or in this context, the universities themselves. It's a cliche to talk about speaking truth unto power, but I think it's important that does underpin the work of the Centre. So I wish everybody involved in the Centre the very best. Certainly from what I've seen, the omens are particularly promising, and I look forward to hearing the other contributions through the morning. Thank you.
Pleased to welcome Claire Callender, of course, Professor of Higher Education and Deputy Director of CGHE, to introduce the Centre's work and tell us why the research that's going to be undertaken is happening. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. Higher education matters. In Europe, universities have been some of our longest surviving institutions. They've weathered political, economic, social, and ideological turmoil. There is continuity. But today, higher education is undergoing transformational change. And understanding these changes fully, what they mean, what's driving them, and their effects, is one of the key objectives and aims of CGHE. We know that over the past 50 years, the size, shape, levels of participation and reach of higher education worldwide has changed radically. It's increasingly globalized and more competitive, both for students and for prestige. In the UK, for example, higher education has become a pillar of science in the innovation system, a primary condition of productivity at work, a mainstay of city and regions, and a national industry, and, as significantly, a site for mediating the future. At the same time, as Peter Scott suggests, higher education is faced with a series of almost existential challenges about its very being, its identity, and its boundaries. And CGHE will explore these changes and challenges, including those about higher education's global, international, and local role, purpose, and contribution, its relationship with the state, how higher education is organized, structured, governed, and funded, what and how learning takes place in higher education, who works in universities, who enters higher education, and who doesn't, and what the outcomes of higher education are, and how these are assessed and evaluated. The ripple effects of all these challenges and changes are far-reaching. What do they mean? What are their intended and unintended consequences? And what are their long-term implications for the political economy and national and global society? CGHE will address all these issues. And what emerges from our research will be important not only for governments, policymakers, higher education institutions and stakeholders, but also, of course, for staff, students, graduates and their families. And central to CGHE and the way we've structured our organisation, our research collaborations and our research projects is influencing and shaping policy and practice. And we're very grateful to the Times Higher, who will be partners in disseminating our research findings. But of course, dissemination is not the same as research impact. And our success will be judged by the difference we can make to global higher education. That is our legacy. It's a very exciting time to be taught to be researching higher education, and doublingly so working with our international experts who are here with us today and who we welcome. All of us at CGHE also are indebted to the ESRC, especially Paul McWhirter and HEFCE for helping to fund the centre, and to UCL IOE for their practical support in setting up the centre. Our thanks also go to Bob Burgess for chairing the CGHE Advisory Board, which we think will have an important role in enhancing our impact. And all of us at CGHE, all of the team, are also grateful to Simon for his energy and dynamism in terms of his intellectual leadership. Together, we aim to make CGHE the global centre for research into higher education, building new theories and understandings and developing new methods of inquiry. And this is reflected in our launch programme today. Today we've got 3 presentations, all of them focusing on major issues about higher education in a global context. We have John Jerrim, who will address the issue of inequality, why poor kids don't go to university. Robert Tijssen from the Netherlands will talk about global trends in science and world rankings, and Ka Ho Mok from Hong Kong will explore the quest for world-class status, challenges and prospects in Asia, and the implications for the UK. And tomorrow, our attention will be turned to how we foster the impact of HE and research with 3 different papers. And finally, as all of you know, when you've organised these sorts of events, they couldn't happen without a lot of behind-the-scenes work. And so our thanks go to Carolyn Gallup and Anna Phillips for all their long hours and for their tireless work. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our first major presentation then, John Jerrim, Reader of Educational and Social Statistics at UCL Institute of Education, picking out one of the major themes of the research programme for CGHE. Why don't more poor kids go to university? 3 things you need to know about access to higher education.
Cool. Thank you very much for all coming today, and thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I'm going to be talking about access to higher education and 3 topics that I personally feel are important and I think needs to be widely appreciated by an audience such as this. But before talking about that, I'm going to talk about the big picture. Why do we care about access to higher education? This slide here illustrates the relationship between income inequality and social mobility. So if we look at the horizontal axis here, countries more towards me are more economically unequal. Whereas going up the y-axis, the vertical axis, the higher up you are there, the less socially mobile a country is. And what we observe is a strong cross-national correlation between these 2 things, right? More unequal countries are also less socially mobile. So countries like the UK have high levels of income inequality and low levels of social mobility. Why is this relevant to education, and particularly to higher education? Well, in a recent paper of mine that I did with Lindsay McMillan, who's also here from the UCL Institute of Education, we show that this relationship can also be observed when you look at the relationship between father's education and son's education. So again, countries more towards me on the horizontal axis have higher levels of income inequality, but now further up on the y-axis, those countries have bigger differences in the rich-poor gap in going to university. So what does this tell us, and what do we argue in this paper? That education is one of the key mechanisms driving the link between inequality and social mobility. Hence, in order to raise the prospects of disadvantaged children, we need to improve their educational attainment and their ability to access higher education. So that's the big picture about why higher education and access to higher education matters, in my opinion. And what I'm going to do in my talk today is cover 3 particular topics. Firstly, I'm going to talk about tuition fees, and I've put up here a provocative and why Jeremy Corbyn's actually a right-winger. The second topic, I'm glad that got a laugh. The second topic I'm going to talk about is information about higher education and how young people need good information for the current system to work. And then I'm going to talk about the critical role of secondary school achievement. So, tuition fees. Why do we want to talk about tuition fees? Well, whenever you do a presentation on university access, someone always raises the issue about tuition fees. And why do they? Well, it's because there's a widespread belief and widespread rhetoric that tuition fees are necessarily unfair. And it gets a lot of coverage in the media. So I've got a quote here from the NUS. The entire university fee system is unfair. NUS report. The Guardian. Social mobility restricted by university tuition fees. Only the super rich benefit from fees and loan system. Higher education tuition fees will lead to more inequality in Europe. And of course, because of that message, you get politicians and you get policymakers jumping on board, right? So I don't think anyone will ever probably forget Nick Clegg's time in office, where he promised to scrap tuition fees because they were unfair. Or I should say before his time in office, not during his time in office. Jeremy Corbyn, obviously now leader of the opposition, said he wants to apologise on behalf of the Labour Party to the last generation of students for the imposition of fees. Again, there's a message that university tuition fees now, the main system in this country, are unfair. I don't believe this argument, and I want to put across a different argument, that we shouldn't go back to the pre-97 way of funding things. Higher education is never free. Someone always has to pay. And when we're talking about free higher education, what we actually mean is taxpayer funded. So let's think about the implications of that a little bit more. We know from a whole series of research that individuals from rich, well-off backgrounds are more likely to go to university, and they then themselves become the rich, right? Rich background, university, good labour market prospects. And so under a taxpayer-funded system, what will happen is they draw out a lot of money from the tax pool. Now we have to think, well, who pays into that tax pool? Well, yes, okay, the rich disproportionately pay a large chunk of taxes, but the poor also pay into the tax pool. So you could end up in a situation where disadvantaged low-income individuals or families are paying their taxes. Some of that will go towards higher education. And who's drawing that money out from higher education? Well, individuals from rich backgrounds. So it could end up, depending on things like how the tax system is designed and the proportion of young people who go to university from different backgrounds, it could end up that under a taxpayer-funded system, the poor could subsidise the education of the rich. To establish that, whether that's the case or not, you have to look at data, right? It's an empirical question. I don't think we're completely there with the answer to this empirical question, but this is a really nice paper by Mishkin that gets us a little bit closer, I think. So this is looking at the old system, 1997 and before. And going along the x-axis, this axis here, are deciles of the income distribution. So these individuals here, 1, 2, 3, are low income, and these individuals here, 8, 9, 10, are high income. And the y-axis is the average net subsidy these groups receive for higher education. So what that basically means is positive figures, bars going upwards, individuals in these income groups take out more from the taxpayer than they put in through their taxes going towards higher education. Whereas negative figures, the opposite holds true, right? So these guys, they end up putting in more to taxes which go towards higher education than they take out in provision and the subsidies that go towards higher education. So under the pre-1997 system, or 1997 and before system, actually you could see individuals from high income, with high income, actually did quite nicely out of it. They got an average subsidy of around £4,000 per person, whereas the low income individuals didn't do so nicely. They ended up putting in more in taxes that go towards higher education than they took out in terms of subsidy. So the point I'm trying to make here is we can say, okay, fees are unfair, but the system before, the 1997 system, was very much unfair. To an economist, this is a great example of something that's regressive. It's kind of the anti-Robin Hood, right? Robbing the poor to give to the rich. So what's the implication of that to me? I think the debate needs to move on. It needs to move on from whether we're going to have tuition fees or not. I think we need to say, okay, tuition fees are here and they're here to stay. What we need to work out now is how we get this current system to work better and how we get this current system to work fairer. So that's my first topic. My second topic then moves on to information. And this is a related topic to me. When I'm talking about information and tuition fees, I'm thinking of a market and the increasing marketisation of higher education. And you ask any economist worth their salt, it's Economics 101, what do you need for a market to work? Well, you need the participants in that market to be well informed. So the buyers, in this case the students, or prospective students, they need to have good information about the costs of higher education, and they also need to know the benefits of higher education as well. So they need to know things and have good information and understand the point at which tuition fees are expected to be paid back. They need to understand the benefit of income contingent loans, and they need to understand how much they're going to earn in the future. Well, what do we know about that? Do we have any evidence on that? And we do have some evidence on that. This is actually from a paper of mine. It's a little bit old now, but it was published in 2011. But this kind of similar pattern holds in many countries across the world. There's a lot of empirical evidence to kind of support this, that young people tend to overestimate their future salary. So students in this particular survey were asked, how much do you expect to earn after university? These were undergraduate students. The red dashed line refers to the expected salary distribution, and the black line refers to the actual income distribution. And what you should be able to see is the wages young people expect to earn are much higher than the wages they actually do earn. So in England, on average, undergraduates overestimate their starting salary by 10%, and if you look at certain subgroups, such as history and English language students, they overestimate by 20%. So young people at university tend to think they'll earn more on average after university than they do. This is from a ESRC-funded project that was conducted by Jill Winus and Sandra McNally, where they went round a series of schools asking young people how much they knew about kind of higher education and the fees and loan system. And it was conducted in 2012, I believe, just as the system was changing. So one of the questions they asked was, okay, do you know when you'll have to pay back your tuition fees? And only 50% of young people gave the right answer. Only 50% knew that it was when you finished university and had a job. Around a third thought it was at the start of each year, and several more said, well, we just simply don't know. And you have to think about our system at the moment. This is a key part of higher education finance in the UK, right? And it's slightly worried that 50% of year 11s, at the point that they're making critical decisions or starting to make critical decisions, don't know the answer. They also asked them, well, do you think student loans are a better way of borrowing than credit cards? Again, something that we know it is better to have a student loan. They're very generous terms. Do young people understand this? Well, actually, only about half of young people, year 11s, strongly agreed or agreed that student loans are better than credit cards. Around 1 in 3 said they don't know. So again, you have to question the type of information and how good of information young people hold about the system. And then they asked, okay, do you think you'll earn more if you go to a higher status university? And focusing on the low socioeconomic group, only about between a quarter and a third of young people from disadvantaged backgrounds in their sample said, yes, we agree or strongly agree that we'll earn more if we go to a better, higher quality uni. Around three-quarters either didn't know or disagreed with that statement. So what do I think the policy responses to this issue of what seems to be a lack of information held by young people are? Well, one of the good things about a global higher education centre is you look to other countries. And this is one place where if I was within BIS, I would be looking to other countries, particularly to the United States, which has a more mature market and system of higher education. They have this website called iPeds, where basically they make it very, very detailed. They make it very easy to compare institutions, and it includes a load of key figures that if you're a young person wanting to go to university, it has it there, including things like the average net price, room and board costs for different kind of categories of students. I appreciate that information provision is increasing in the UK, but I still don't think it's at the level of the United States, and I think this is kind of a really good example of potentially a way forward to increase information provision. The second point I think we need to realise is, actually, we don't have a lot of the answers ourselves. So let's take this point about students needing to know the cost of higher education. Well, for many universities, do we really know the average net price of students? Well, not completely, because that depends on the bursaries. And bursaries differ greatly between different types of institution. And a lot of the time you won't know actually if you're going to get a bursary until kind of quite far down the track, right? So it's very difficult to then take that cost into account when you're deciding whether to go to university or not. And then I just showed this slide, right? Okay, 3/4 of young people either disagree with this statement about whether they'll earn more if they go to a better university, and 1/3 don't know. Well, actually, we don't know the answer to that, I think. I don't think we know the returns to different qualities of universities, and if students do particular subject university combinations, how much better off they'll be. And I think this is where some really kind of good research can come in, pushing the field forward. We need to get access to better data, stuff like the National Pupil Database, HEFCE records, linked to tax records, so we can start providing more information about how returns to universities differ between different institutions of different quality. Okay, and now moving on to the third topic I want to cover about higher education, and that's the critical role that there is of secondary school achievement. Most people who know about higher education have probably seen some form of this argument before. What I'm going to try and do is put this form of the argument into a global context. So if anyone's seen my work or seen me present before, they're thinking, God, Jerrim's managed to go about a quarter of an hour without mentioning PISA and his work on PISA. Well, I'm now going to actually bring that back and show you some stuff around kind of PISA. So what I did, I've got some data which allows me to, in 3 countries, look at the average PISA score of children in Australia, England, and the United States who go to university and who go to elite universities. I should say, for anyone that doesn't know, PISA is a cross-national study of 15-year-olds' educational achievement in reading, maths, and science. It gets a huge amount of attention across the world. So these are kind of the average mathematics scores of children who go to university and elite university. The mean across the OECD is 500, and the standard deviation is 100. So you can see that children, to get to university, the average score of university students in these countries is kind of the high 500s. And to get to an elite university, it's around about 600. So is kind of one standard deviation above the international mean. To put that another way, you have to be around the 85th percentile of the international achievement distribution. Or to put that another way, the OECD would equate these figures to elite university students being, on average, 2.5 years ahead of the average pupil within an OECD country. So these are kind of very, very high scores, right? So what proportion of young people achieve these scores from different backgrounds in these different countries? So the grey bars refer to individuals from high-income backgrounds who attend private schools. The orange bars refer to individuals from the top 20% of income backgrounds. And the blue bars refer to the poorest 20% of pupils. And what do we see across all three countries? Well, let's take the United States as an example. Around 35 to 40% of the most advantaged, socially advantaged pupils achieve these test scores to reach an elite university, compared to only around about 5% of children from the poorest backgrounds. Huge, huge differences by age 15. And to put this in the most politically incorrect terms and way as possible, the main reason why more poor kids don't go to university is by the time they're age 15, they're simply not smart enough. They simply haven't developed enough cognitive skills in the right areas to be able to access high-status institutions in particular. And we can see that through the next few slides. So these show the relationship, again, in Australia, England, and the United States between children from low parental education backgrounds and high parental education backgrounds of getting to university. So in England, we can see, not conditional upon anything else, there's a 40 percentage point difference between young people from low parental education backgrounds getting to university compared to high parental education backgrounds. What happens when we control for these age 15 PISA scores just in mathematics? Well, it goes down like that. It drops by over half. The difference is now kind of gone from 45 percentage points down to 20 percentage points. And if we then control for stuff all the way through to 18, so at the point they actually go to university, the gap pretty much disappears, at least in England. There's still something there in Australia, still something there in the United States, but we can see how far it's gone down. So what does the implication of this? When we're talking about access to higher education, the vast majority of our resources, our time and our effort should go in to raising secondary school achievement to close the university access gap. That doesn't mean that there's not smart things we can do that are cost effective post-15, post-16 towards the point of entry. It's just the bulk of our resources probably need to be spent earlier. And that's it for my presentation, and I welcome any questions.
I'm Matt Moore from the Association of Commonwealth Universities. I suspect, John, you thought probably somebody would pick you up on the smart poor kids comment, as somebody who would probably consider themselves a poor kid. A pedantic point is that PISA measures mathematical ability, not intelligence. And which is a pedantic point, I know, but it probably matters. But I'd actually take you back to something that you said earlier, and some of your graphs, which I noticed were occupied by OECD countries, and most of the discussion is Anglo-centric. And I thought, with this being a global centre, that it might be interesting to think about the global dimension of fees, because the UK has quite a specific system of state-based funding for higher education. It always has in some capacity, or at least for a long time. So if you were in a position to advise perhaps a nation that's got very large growing demand for higher education and doesn't have any system in place for either subsidizing study or a state-based taxpayer-funded system, what would your take be on tuition fees in that position, if you were in somewhere like Kenya, for instance, rather than here in London?
I'm not an expert on Kenya. I think I'll come back to your first initial point, which was why it's very Anglo-centric. And it comes back to me as a researcher thinking, you know what, I've picked these Anglo-centric countries because A, they in some ways make particular sense to compare, but B, they've also got the data that allow me to kind of look in to do this comparable work more. And you know what, if there was data out there that would allow me to compare 20, 30, 40 countries to look at these issues, I would go out and do it. So taking back to my kind of first couple of slides where I looked at income inequality and social mobility, again, there was kind of 23 countries in that, but obviously countries more kind of developing with low and middle income, they don't have kind of the same quality of data as the other ones. To come back to your second point, I'm going to be honest, and I'd say I don't know quite what I'd do in that situation. I have given it absolutely zero thought. So I don't think I want to think up something on the fly rather than kind of, I'd like to go away and kind of consider that a bit more rather than just kind of blurt something out.
Over there.
Oh, hello, it's Tristan McCowan from the UCL Institute of Education. A couple of points. I think it was your second, over here, yeah. I think it was your second slide that showed the relationship between intergenerational access to higher education and income inequality. And your next statement was to say that we need to equalise access in order to decrease inequalities. And presumably the causal relationship could go either way. And I'm wondering, do you have other data that suggests that that is the direction of causality? And the second point relates to your comments on tuition fees. And I'm sure there's nobody in this room that thinks it's fair for poor people to pay disproportionately for rich people to go to university. But I'm wondering why the next step of your argument was to point the finger at tax-funded higher education. Surely an alternative strategy would be to ensure that access to higher education is fairly distributed across different income groups.
Okay, so on your first point, sure, the direction of causality is often unclear. In that paper we've got a very clear paragraph where we're saying, look, we are looking at associations only, we're going to try and look at what we think are potential drivers, and we're going to decompose this relationship between the two. So, yeah, it's difficult, and I think particularly because that paper is very much cross-national, and you've got, let's call it spade a spade, you've got 21 data points. Even doing an association with 21 data points is pretty difficult. Even doing a scatter plot is pretty difficult. So, yeah, I think I completely take that point and tease out cause and effect, It's the nightmare of all kind of quantitative social scientists in particular. On the second point, about why I point the finger at taxpayer-funded higher education, I just think that I really like that paper by Michigan. I think it makes a really good point that's not out there and not thought about enough and discussed. And that's why I went in that particular direction. And all systems, all ways of financing higher education, of higher education in general, access to higher education, they've all got pros, they've all got cons. I don't have enough time, particularly to go through all the cons, pros and cons of every system. I just thought that was a really kind of interesting point with some good empirical evidence behind it that I think kind of was put out there by me to encourage debate, get people to think more about this kind of fees argument versus taxpayer-funded argument, which seems to be kind of coming back with a new main opposition in this country.
Oh, hello. I'm Mike Wolf. Hello, I'm over here, sorry. From Kappa. I just wanted to raise a question and have your comments. Thank you for your remarks, by the way. If we look at questions of social and economic inequality, both nationally, globally, regionally, however you want to do it, we shouldn't, of course, be surprised that that's reflected in the educational system. It seems to me that the solution to this is not an educational one. You have to go to root causes of social and economic inequality. It's a much huger question. And I think what you're sort of proposing is putting a Band-Aid on an amputated wound. And that's not where we're going to find the solution. It may be utopian, maybe there is no solution. But I wondered if you'd comment on that.
In many ways, we've got sympathy for the argument you've just put forward, and what often goes through my mind when I'm thinking about social inequalities, kind of big picture stuff, is we never really kind of define success. When would we be kind of, when's the socioeconomic gradient narrow enough? And we don't ever kind of think like that. We're never going to get it to zero. That is utopia, to think it's going to be zero. But at what point do we, or would we be happy with it? And I've got sympathy in many ways for what you just said, that I think often in policy worlds or whatever, we try to tinker around the edges a little bit. And I think actually to get to the position where social inequality is at a level that a lot of people maybe in this room might like, you would need kind of really, really radical change. And just looking at education probably might not be enough. But again, I think I'd like to have that as a kind of broad discussion for debate, and maybe get to a point of like, okay, what are we aiming at? Because before you know what you're aiming at, you know, it's hard to recommend the solution.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Bowden from University of Roehampton, and I want to make three quick points about the tuition fees point. And I'm an accountant and a tax specialist, so they're somewhat different frame from being an economist. First of all, the current tuition fees system is rapidly becoming financially unstable because the default rate is making it more expensive than giving the money directly to universities, rapidly approaching that point. Secondly, I think the framing of your points around who benefits from higher education is rather too narrow, in that you're not considering the wider social benefit that accrues to all of us from having graduates. So it's not just the doctor earning a bigger salary who benefits from having a medical degree, it's all of us in this room who at some point in our lives need to go and visit doctors. So from that perspective, I see absolutely no problem with cross-subsidisation of people into higher education, the subsidisation of higher education, because we all benefit as society from those enhanced skills, and therefore in some sense we should all contribute towards paying for them. Thirdly, you talk about the old system and how it was, and I think I probably agree with you, it was a tax subsidy to wealthier people, to people who paid more tax, but also took more out of the system. But there's a real problem with that, in that you probably see that with school education in this country as well, in that kids in middle class areas going to school probably do much better out the school system than kids in working class areas. But I don't see, I dread to see it happening, but it might, I suppose, the same kind of solution to that's happened in this country over the last 15 years on fees, which is the replacement of a kind of hidden subsidy to the rich with what's basically a consumption tax, a poll tax, in which everybody, rich or poor, pays the same amount of money. And that, I think, is very problematic. And surely one alternative answer is that we increase tax rates on richer people in order to cross-subsidise the education of people from poorer families and therefore aid social justice.
I think I'd like to pick up, sorry, if you want to clap. I didn't mean to cut off the clapping by talking. There we go. Okay. So I'm actually going to disagree with that third point, I think. As in, I don't think that would be a subsidy when you come to the school system. I think it's probably something particular around the higher education system. And it's to do with children from, or young people from well-off backgrounds going to university, so disproportionately likely to go, whereas young people from disadvantaged backgrounds don't go to university at all. Whereas in the school system, you know, at least everyone goes to school. Sure, those schools are of different quality, but I think that the argument would probably break down there. And I think, again, it's an empirical question about whether they'd put more into tax that goes towards schools than they take out through school quality. But I think it probably wouldn't work out the same as it is in higher education. So I can't give you a definitive answer. I don't have data, and I certainly don't have data in front of me. But in my opinion, I think it would probably work out differently. I was going to comment on your second point as well, which I can't quite remember now.
Wider social benefit.
Yeah, and I was going to comment on that, saying, okay, the third point I disagree with. On the second point, yeah, I agree. So.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm over here. Sorry. I'm a PhD researcher looking at the university experiences of disadvantaged students, so working class students, first generation students like myself. And your slide about low socioeconomic status students not understanding the benefits of higher status universities, I understand to be true, but I also understand to be true by lots of research showing that when they do apply, they don't get in. So the question isn't, do they understand that higher status is better for them? The question is, what are we going to do to address bias in the admissions processes?
I think the work, again, by Jake Anders, who was a PhD student here, showed the major problem was, again, about skills, not having enough skills, and conditional on application. I believe that the socioeconomic gap then was almost completely removed. I know Vicky Bolivar's got some stuff from Durham, which is where she kind of argues that there are kind of certain inequalities in the actual kind of application to acceptance position. But I think that's an open question. Again, I think Jake's work from here would kind of argue against that. So. Yeah, again, the work that I've seen would suggest that that's kind of a smaller fish compared to other things that are going on. Again, let's all look at some data and kind of drill down into it some more. And I think it's another example where we might look across different countries, look at the systems that are going on in different countries around that, and see, okay, is there something similar going on in other nations? I think it'd be actually a really interesting project to do.
Peter Scott from the home team, so to speak. A question and a comment. The question is, your second point, the implication of it was that students were especially ill-informed consumers. Is there any evidence to suggest that? Are they worse informed than, for example, purchase of financial services, purchases of rail tickets, purchase of everything? I mean, isn't it true that in all markets, consumers are not especially well informed, and actually that's how markets work to some degree?
I'll answer that.
So is there comparative evidence? Is there evidence actually that they are especially ill-informed?
I don't think there is any evidence that they're especially ill-informed. I was going to pick up your point about rail commuters, and all I'm going to say is I'm very aware about how much my train ticket cost this morning. Yeah. Whereas I think sometimes students, you know, it comes back to not knowing the average net price that their course is going to cost.
Okay, okay. My second comment is your last point. I mean, essentially that universities are off the hook because poor kids just aren't bright enough when it comes to it. I'm caricaturing, I know. If you tried that argument out on, say, race in the US, would it work? It wouldn't work for a moment. So why should we accept it in relation to social class?
So we should accept the point in relation to social class, because I did say very clearly, by age 15, they are not smart enough. They do not have high enough levels of attainment. And so what do we need to do? We need to raise their attainment. It's not saying that it's impossible to raise their levels of attainment by social class, just as it's not impossible to raise educational attainment by race. It's just that's where the majority of our resources and our emphasis should go.
Sorry, can I just, if you want to ask a question, you're going to have to catch out one of our colleagues with a microphone. So, Les.
Les Ebden, Director of Fair Access to Higher Education. John, you probably know that universities are spending nearly £750 million a year on promoting and safeguarding access to university for disadvantaged people. And I gather from what you're saying that the fact that they're spending over half of that money on bursaries and student support is not going to be effective because of the information.
In some curriculums at the moment, it might want to be taken out to incorporate more of that type of stuff in my opinion. I remember a conversation I had at the university, and I suggested that a module was developed kind of about life skills or about kind of more professional kind of real world skills. I got looked at like I was absolutely crazy. So yeah, but I completely agree. I think there should be more around.
Could I go back to Leiden Institute of Education, to the issue of funding and the tuition fees? Because I was on the Steering Committee in 1997 when it made that radical decision to change to fees. And you're absolutely right, the argument then about the middle class subsidy was absolutely clear. There was no question of it. But the other argument was about the return to the graduate individual. There was a big disparity in postgraduate salaries, and that was one of the reasons that some of us on the committee argued for graduate tax. Now, at that point, an incoming Labour government was not going to hear of anything like a tax. The same thing happened some 5 years later when they were reconsidering it. And I just wondered, given that the argument now is even more persuasive in terms of the huge disparity of post-graduation salaries, is there any hope that that could be a potential answer? Because it certainly would change the perception of families going into higher education. Do you think that's still feasible?
Well, the system we've got at the moment isn't actually that far removed from a graduate tax, right? It's just that once you've paid it off, you kind of get to keep the extra cash at the end. I would see it more as kind of a rejig of a kind of... Its impact would come through perception of families, maybe the understanding more that, okay, it's a tax and it's at this limit. So there might be scope for it, but the system at the moment is not that far removed from it, in my opinion. So. It's not. Do you say it's not progressive?
I mean, the modelling that was done then is that the more you earn, the more you pay. And you don't necessarily just pay off the same proportion of what you earn.
I think I'd like to see kind of the empirics behind it to see whether it is progressive or not. I think it might be an unanswered question at the moment, but...
Paul Ashwin, Lancaster University and CGHE, over here. Hi. You've offered us a very individualised analysis of the costs and benefits of going to higher education. So the most important thing a young person needs to know is how much it costs and how much they benefit. I wonder what tools economists worth their salt, like yourself, would have to offer us in terms of thinking of more collective ways of understanding the costs and benefits of universities beyond simply looking at individuals. How can we together develop ways of analysing higher education systems that actually go beyond the individual and think about what happens in society with higher education?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, it's about what an economist would term externalities, the benefits to kind of not only the individual but the positive benefits to everyone else. And economists worth their salt have never kind of particularly been good at actually measuring externalities, because externalities, these things, are incredibly difficult to measure. And whenever you do try and measure them and take them into account in your analysis, you just kind of look at your file and go, God, what is this? This makes no sense whatsoever. So we did here at the Institute of Education a while back have the Wider Benefits of Learning Centre, where they did try to kind of tease out some of these things a little bit more, obviously not try and put kind of a monetary value on it. So some work has been done there, but I completely appreciate the point coming from yourself and the wider audience that, okay, things don't just accrue to the individual, they do accrue to society as well.
I'm Professor Miriam David, also from the UCL Institute of Education. And I want to ask a question of you about what you know about the nature of social change over the last, say, 50 years related to higher education. And one of the main factors, in my view, that's happened is the role of women and the role of girls in higher education, including the differences between working class girls and working class boys. And I'd like to ask you what your evidence is about the differences between working class girls and working class boys in going to university now, and what impact that is having on the future. And also the fact that many of us in this room have been women teaching in higher education and have been involved in trying to influence social change and social equality, including gender equality.
This is going to be an unsatisfactory answer, but it's a truthful answer. I haven't particularly thought about the gender dimension interacting with the social class dimension, particularly over an extended period of time. But I think, again, that's the type of thing maybe this centre can look at not only within the UK, but also internationally as well, because there'll obviously be other countries where women's rights are still not as strong as they are in this country.
So Divya Narayanan from the University of Oxford. I'm a master's student. In one of your slides, you talked about providing students with more information, and your comparison was the United States. And as you can tell from my accent, that's where I come from. I know that my choices going into college were influenced by the fact that I had certain opportunities at the high school level that were not available in less well-off school districts. And my question is it really just providing the information, or is it actually making sure that students take advantage of that information? Because the organization or the page that you showed on your slide, I have to profess, I never used it as a high school student. I didn't know that it existed. So, by simply putting the information out there, does it really guarantee that students are going to be using that information?
I think you're completely right, and you can provide all the information in the world, but it may or may not have an effect, and I think there needs to be a way of, you do need to kind of work out a way to make people take notice of that information. So I agree with your point, information provision can't be done alone. And it comes back to the point I made earlier about evaluation. You might want to go out and see if you provide certain pieces of information and how you provide it, how that influences kind of young people's perceptions.
Hello, Ryan Mercer, the Royal Society. One thing that struck me from one of the earlier slides you had was about how back in the late 90s, the income distribution of how university was paid for and how it was affected. Do you think that the massive increase in participation in higher education would have affected those figures quite markedly? Because at that point it was around 15% of people went to university, and now it's much closer to 50%. And the disproportionate, obviously more, just by definition, more disadvantaged students go to university as a proportion than before, because if you're going from 15% to 45, it's quite different.
So I believe the proportion was a little bit higher than that. I think these figures were kind of after the, I think these were kind of like mid-90s, so I think the proportion was higher. Having said that, I think you've raised a good point that actually the fact that there now is a higher percentage of people going to university, and particularly for disadvantaged background, they would kind of change those figures around a bit. So again, it's why I kind of pointed out it's an empirical question. Those empirics certainly would change when the proportions who go to university from different social backgrounds do change. So I don't know the answer to how that thing would look when you change those kind of proportions, but they certainly would change.
One more question.
Yes, last, but hopefully not least. My name is William Locke. I'm Deputy Director of CG alongside Claire, supporting Simon and the team. So I thought I'd introduce myself before we finish. Comment, question. I'd quite like to help Jeremy Corbyn be a little less right-wing in developing his policy, and to think about really what should be the share between graduates and the taxpayer. Now, there actually has been some work by economists in the States and elsewhere. Walter McMahon springs to mind, using econometrics and calculating that the public benefit of higher education is something like 50%, and the private individual benefit something like 50%. Now that seems to me a kind of sensible share to have between graduates and government spending. What's your view on that?
My initial thought when you were saying that was you may have missed out a group. So you've got taxpayers and you've got students themselves. You might think about employers being in that mix as well, right? So they might well contribute some more to how much is paid. I mean, 50%, I mean, I hadn't seen the paper that you were referencing. And it depends very much, can you tease out that public benefit from the individual benefit? So I'll go away, I'll read the paper, but I think it would depend what figure you please. Done.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Thank you, everyone, for a very interesting discussion. To introduce Robert Tijssen from Leiden University in the Netherlands. We're going to take questions at the end of both presentations, so hold fire until we start up the next Q&A. But Robert.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start by saying it's a great pleasure to be here today at this very special launch event of CG. Secondly, at these events and many other events in higher education, it's become customary to have something on higher education and rankings. And today, ladies and gentlemen, that's me. Inevitably, I guess in this day and age that we spend time on how universities compare to one another. So what I want to do today is to look slightly backwards in time and see what we've accomplished with these world university rankings, and sort of fast forward into the future and see where the gaps are and where perhaps we could start filling those gaps and improving the rankings we have today. My perspective actually is one of an insider. I am a contributor to a couple of these ranking systems, and I produce data. I develop indicators. This is very much an insider perspective. And being an insider means every now and then I probably will be slightly technical, so you'll have to bear with me on that. I will try to avoid as much technicalities as possible, of course. Moving on then, of course, rankings means we have to be responsive. We have to be responsive to the dynamics in higher education, to the differences between higher education systems. And in my case, we have to take on board the most recent developments of the so-called 21st century universities, the research-intensive ones, because I probably should add I will be focusing mainly on research-intensive universities, although this introductory part of my presentation will sort of cast a wider net and provide you a wider scope. But in the end, I will focus on research and research-intensive universities. Well, this is what many universities, particularly the so-called global universities, are facing nowadays. And you can see it's quite a long list of responsibility, social responsibility, including ensuring employability, participate in social debates, do excellent research, of course, be competitive, earn income for the university or any other authority. But today I'm going to focus, of course, on how these universities are supposed to gain domestic and international reputation. And this is, of course, where the rankings come in, because many of these global universities are expected to be at the top of these rankings, or at least to rise in the rankings. And we all know that not all universities can be in the top 100, let alone in the top 10, so there is a problem. There's a large degree of ambition and aspiration, but there's not much room at the top. So this is why rankings have become so important, and there's so much criticism, because they seem to drive these almost perverse processes, the race to the top. There are good reasons actually why these rankings exist and why they are so popular, and this is just a couple of them, because basically they are excellent tools, of course, for marketing and promotion. And if you look at university websites, you will see rankings are really all over the place. Not only amongst the top 100 universities, but actually all other aspiring universities at some point, somewhere on the websites, will refer to rankings and their positions on these rankings. So in that sense, rankings have become a huge success as a promotional or reputation tool. There are other reasons, of course, why rankings can be important. External accountability, either independently or as part of a quality assurance system. There's inputs to strategic debate on institutional development, of course, often in back doors. There's institutional benchmarking and comparisons, and this is again where you, on some websites you can see direct comparisons between the specific universities and others, benchmark universities, becoming increasingly popular. And finally, of course, there's also something around setting performance targets and organizational goals. And again, we are back to issues of how rankings are used internally in terms of strategic importance in marketing and institutional policies. So there's a lot there, but I should emphasize that mainly at this point in time, it's basically about marketing and promotion. But as rankings increase in popularity and in quality, I would say we will see more and more of these other types of usages over the next few years. So there's a lot of reasons why rankings are dominant and becoming increasingly dominant in higher education. The key thing, I guess, is that they're an enhanced, that they're a manifestation of what I call enhanced institutional profiling. So there's a bit of competition there, but there's also some sense of self-awareness where universities simply want to profile themselves, recognize themselves perhaps as good as possible within these ranking systems. This is not driven out of sheer curiosity or transparency. It's also very much the outcome of intense competitiveness amongst universities, amongst countries even, and all trying to sort of get at the top of the ranking in order to recruit the best researchers, to attract the best students, to get a lot of funding from a diversity of sources. So it's also very much about strategic positioning of universities on a global scale. And having said that, obviously this has impact on the strategic decision-making processes within universities. How do they want to position themselves worldwide? How do they want to position themselves in rankings, and why? And how are these positions used for internal marketing and strategic decision-making? So all these reasons are out there, and they sort of seem to be self-enforcing and driving this process into more and more rankings and more media coverage for rankings. I want to focus on world rankings, actually, because like I said in my previous slide, there are a lot of different kinds of rankings out there. In this particular presentation, I will look only at these world rankings. And there are a couple of them out there, and this is just the selection of those rankings, the more popular ones, the more attractive ones in terms of their diversity of information, in terms of their information outlets. And they seem to be, at this point, the best, the well-known. And at this point, I probably should point out that the two ranking systems where I contribute are U-Multirank and the Leiden ranking. And as you can see, it's very crowded actually in this market space, and there's a lot of competition going on between these different ranking systems. And I personally believe that that's a good thing, because that is one of the drivers why rankings improve. Not because out of intrinsic goals, but just simply to beat the others, to retain the attention of universities, of the audience, and of the popular press. But in terms of improving the system, improving the idea of rankings, I think that's a very good development. In this particular presentation, I want to guide you through some of the essentials of these ranking systems, and one of the most important one is that within this group we have two different types of rankings. This is an example, Times Higher Education, of the first type, and this is what we tend to call a league table ranking. So you have the one number here, and universities are ranked from 1 down, top ranking universities to 100 or 1,000. It's actually not really relevant. But the whole thing is these types of rankings, they reduce a lot of information, many variables into just the one number. So these are basically extreme examples of data reduction tools. They serve a purpose and they are very popular because of this simplicity actually. Very simple. But that shouldn't fool you, because behind the simplicity actually is a very sophisticated system of collecting different kinds of information, referring to different dimensions, performance dimensions of universities, teaching and training, learning, research, international outlook in this particular case, but also industry income and innovation. And underneath each of these dimensions are indicators or metrics. And in this particular case, if you want to reduce that all in the one number, this overall score, you will have to introduce weights. And this particular ranking has all these different weights, these percentages here, as a way, as a rationale, you might say, to reduce data into the one number. That is one of the strengths of these types of rankings. They have the one number, but one of the weaknesses is, of course, also the arbitrariness of these weights. So that is a thing you have to keep in mind. So that applies to all these sort of league table rankings in more or less the same fashion. The second type of ranking are what I call the scoreboard rankings. And U Multirank here is one of those typical scoreboards. So they don't have the overall one number with the ranking from 1 to down to, say, 500. They have different rankings for each individual indicator. So these columns here, these vertical columns are indicators, they're metrics. And in this particular case, there's a letter from A, top score, down to E, I think, low score. It's a different way of looking at universities and the diversity of their performance profiles. And personally, I think this is a much more balanced way, and in a sense also more transparent way, because there are no rankings here. Each indicator, each metrics stands on its own and can be used separately to rank universities or order them in any way the user likes. So in a sense, this is a totally different, more user-friendly type of ranking, you might say. In terms of coverage, U Multirank in this particular case also covers all these performance dimensions. There's international orientation, there's research, there's regional engagement, there's teaching and learning, knowledge transfer. And this is just a small part of all the indicators, all the metrics this particular system has. Because this is the so-called institutional ranking, but U Multirank also has a second layer, the so-called field-based rankings. And these field-based rankings are very much diverse and cater to different needs according to different disciplines. For example, in the latest edition of U Multirank, we have a special section on medicine, medical sciences, and they have an indicator, believe it or not, bedside teaching. So these particular rankings open up a lot of possibilities for new kinds of information, for new kind of metrics. So there's a lot happening there in terms of new developments in these rankings. But in a sense, of course, they operate in a marketplace. They are, in a sense, both transparency tools, but also information brokers. They try to sort of connect information supply to information demand, sitting there in between. In both cases, universities are very much intensely involved, either as information producers or as users of the information. But we've heard it this morning, all markets are imperfect, and that definitely applies to rankings, because they come with a whole series of what I call information asymmetries and shortcomings. And these are the big stumbling blocks all ranking producers are now facing. There's a big imbalance between supply and demand. So demand is really much higher than supply right now. There's a limited coverage of the key performance indicators of universities, and I'll show you some examples of that later. We don't have a very broad set of indicators right now that could apply to each and every university worldwide, so that's another thing that's lacking. And there's a scarcity of high quality data. We simply don't have the resources, the databases, to collect all the necessary information to provide a comprehensive, systematic profile of each and every of these global universities. And finally, there's also a lack of transparency on how these rankings actually operate. How do they do the calculations? How do they collect the information? Which criteria do they use? Which kind of computations do they use? So there's a lot of problems there in terms of structural shortcomings, and we have a lot of work to do because there's still room for improvement. Oh, so that's what we're facing. And actually, if you look at it from this particular metaphor, I would say current rankings are actually losing a lot. They're missing a lot of information. I'm not sure how much is hidden beneath the surface, but from my perspective, we are missing out on quite a lot of relevant information, which is still out there and that needs to be collected and needs to be mined. And if you look at it from this perspective of missing information, there are two questions that come to mind. Do the available data sources and indicators provide relevant information? Well, yes, what we have now, I would say yes. It is relevant and we can use it for specific purposes. But the other question is the more tough one. Are those sources sufficient to describe and analyze important organizational features? And there I'm a bit more reluctant. Probably the answer would be no. I don't think the information is at that level yet to provide a clear-cut, comprehensive, understandable and meaningful picture of what a university is. And actually, if I looked at the rankings of my own university, this is what I see. it's a twisted image of reality. It looks strange. The university is slightly isolated from its environment. Bits and pieces doesn't seem to align. There are structural holes there, missing information. And this alone already tells you that there's still a lot of work to be done to provide a nice, comprehensive, meaningful image of what your or my university actually is in terms of numbers. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And some of those holes actually refer to these particular features, which are still lacking, or at least not adequately covered in today's World University Rankings. And believe me, I've done some research, and this is just a short list actually of what I feel is still missing in terms of inputs and facilities, in terms of activities, in terms of outcomes and impacts. And this morning we heard about future earnings. I would definitely like to know more about future earnings at the level of individual universities or their departments. But apart from the business schools, we simply have no idea about this. So there's room for improvement. And there are some elephants in the room, actually, in this particular list. So really things we can't overlook and we really shouldn't ignore. And I would say learning outcomes is one of them, where we really lack essential information. And teaching quality is another, particularly in the UK case, where we now have this issue of teaching excellence. I would say that is a big elephant in the room. Which has to be addressed. Another one which I find particularly interesting is, of course, the socio-economic impact of universities. Regionally, globally, no one actually has a clue. In spite of all these impact stories you have in the UK, it doesn't provide you with a very comprehensive, systematic overview, one that you could easily compare with other countries or even among universities. So this is the research agenda, I would say, for these rankings in the 21st century. We have to deal with these issues, and particularly those elephants in the room. Okay, so looking slightly back, what have we achieved then over this last, say, 15 years in this particular millennium? Well, definitely we know that the mission diversity and organizational complex has increased immensely, significantly. That much is clear, if you just keep in mind my previous slide. And how are ranking systems, these global ranking systems, dealing with this new reality? Well, there are different scenarios, actually. If you look at the sheer numbers of new indicators, could be one of them. So that's scenario one. We're not even keeping up, we're falling behind. There are more and more issues in higher education, global higher education, which are simply not captured by rankings or not adequately captured. Scenario two is, well, we seem to be keeping up. We are producing new indicators, we are producing new metrics, new information sources. So we seem to be doing fine in that sense. Ideally, I would say we're looking for scenario three. Rankings are catching up. They are collecting more and more information on relevant topics, and they seem to be capturing all the modern day dynamics of higher education systems. Well, I haven't done systematic studies, I haven't counted all these metrics, but my intuitive feeling would be that I don't think we're catching up. We're just keeping up. But again, the jury is still out on that. But that's not really my concern. My concern is actually with this, with the quality of the indicators, the quality of the metrics. You can develop tens or hundreds of metrics, but that's not really relevant. The relevant one is to have key high-quality metrics on those things that really matter. So I think we should focus the discussion actually on the quality of the data we have, the quality of the indicators. Has that changed? Are there minor improvements or are there major improvements? And again, that's a tough question, because now we've entered the domain of quality. And we all know quality is a very fuzzy, difficult concept, but we will have to address this issue. And I've thought about it, and from my perspective, and again, this is an insider perspective, this is a technical perspective, there are 5 criteria we have to look at in terms of quality of current indicators, but also new indicators. There's information value. So how do indicators reduce complexity and extract interesting information? I think we're doing pretty fine there, so I would give that a plus. They are able to reduce an extremely complex organization or system into something perhaps not meaningful, useful, but at least it's interesting. There's the operational value and the analytical value. So how are we doing in terms of methodologies, in terms of precision of data? Well, there it's difficult. It depends. It depends on the ranking system, it depends on the metrics, it depends on how things are designed, how things are computed. I'm not really pessimistic there, because this is, I think, where we are making a lot of improvement right now with all these different global ranking systems. My problems, my worries are here with assessment value and stakeholder value. So how can we present, how can we produce useful data for a wide range of users, ranging from students and their parents all the way up to politicians and decision makers? I think we still have a lot of work there to develop indicators that really appeal to people, where they recognize their environment, where they recognize things that really matter to them. And stakeholder value is probably one of the key challenges. And even as I speak, U Multirank now is facing criticism from 2 university associations in Europe, which don't seem to be very pleased with U Multirank, how it represents them and the reality. And U Multirank, we have to face the criticism, we have to engage in dialogue with these people, because we can learn from them. You have to keep in mind, these ranking systems are also learning tools for those who develop them, but also for those who use them. And we have to bring these 2 groups together. Okay, so still a lot of work there to be done on quality issues, and some of this is really essential. We have guidelines to do that. We're not operating in a vacuum here. There are principles of good practice, of improving with these world university rankings, and they were designed more than 10, I think even 20 years ago. So, and what I try to do as a ranking developer, as a metric developer, I try to take these things seriously, and I use them actually as a sort of a sounding board to see if my indicators or the work I do in indicators actually works, if this really helps me to do quality checks. There are problems here, of course, because there are some tall orders here, for example, on context. Oh, that is, of course, very difficult. If you want to incorporate the context of a particular university in a ranking system, you have to start breaking down your data by field or by department, etc. That's the only way, of course, to tackle this other issue of diversity. And like I said, U Multirank and other ranking systems are making some progress in the sense of breaking down data according to fields or science or other entities. But again, it is difficult, but we have these, and I think they will help us to further develop these ranking systems over the next couple of years. Going down one level into the more technical level, we have something similar with regards to metrics. And here is something from a really recent HEFCE report, actually, which is called the TIDE, metrics TIDE. And here are again some, let's call them quality criteria, you need to look at closely if you want to design high quality metrics. I won't go through the entire list, but again, diversity here is singled out as one of the key quality criteria these metrics need to take on board. They have to cater for a wide audience, a wide range of fields of science or teaching curricula, for example. So this is my environment. This is the environment in which I operate when I think about rankings, when I try to develop better rankings or better metrics. Okay, so this was basically my introduction. Where are we with rankings right now? And now I want to move to the second part of my presentation and look slightly forward to what we could expect over the next couple of years, particularly in terms of research or research-related indicators in these metrics and these rankings. This is an interesting introduction, actually. It is a ranking, actually, but it's a theme-based ranking. It's a league table ranking. It was introduced last year by Thomson Reuters, one of these international information providers. And it's, as far as I know, the first ranking which tells you which are the world's most innovative universities, believe it or not. I found the term innovative very intriguing here. But it is an interesting new addition. So for the first time, we have this concept of innovative university. And of course, what I did first was to check out the indicators, the metrics. How in heaven's name did they define this tricky concept of innovation? Well, here's what they did. Here's the list of indicators. Most of it relates to research or to technological development. So it's either research, publications, or patents-based. A lot of these indicators are not new, by the way. They have been introduced, used in other ranking systems as well. But to my surprise, there's also a new indicator here. So these people also are starting to improve, starting to add new indicators. For me, this was particularly interesting because I know this indicator. Actually, I developed it 10 years ago. So it was very, and I never used it because I didn't see the added value for my kind of work. But apparently these people at Thomson Reuters had other ideas, and they, for the first time, there's my indicator. So I'm a very happy man, I guess. But I'm not really sure whether or not this is really relevant for them. But anyway, it's there. This is a nice example of that people are improving and new indicators every now and then do pop up. Since we're now on the topic of research, I have to admit that research is relatively easy environment to produce new indicators, to improve on indicators, because we have access to some really incredible databases. We have the Web of Science database, millions and millions of publications, Scopus database, also quite a large coverage, and we have other databases with patents. So that's easy stuff. And in a sense, that is low-hanging fruit, because the data are there. They don't have to be supplied or self-reported by universities. We could simply mine those databases. This is part of what I do, and today I would like to pick 3 of those apples and introduce to you 3 trends in world science that could be actually relevant for designing new indicators that might help us better understand trends in universities worldwide. So those trends, and they're all part of ongoing research with me and my colleagues, where we're trying to look closely at what's happening in science and trying to, in a sense, produce data. So in a sense, it's a sneak preview. You're the first actually who actually is looking at what we can do in terms of these developments and how they might fit into better designed ranking systems. So the first of those trends is what I call research science is becoming more application oriented. This is what I see if I look at those databases. I'm not saying applied, but application oriented. And my feeling is that many universities or global science is actually moving in that direction. And I have some evidence to back that up, and I'll show it to you. My second trend is actually science and scientific impact is becoming more multidisciplinary. For many of you, this won't come as a surprise because we all know that science itself is becoming more interdisciplinary. So it's only fair to assume that the impact of science is also becoming more interdisciplinary. But again, nobody has actually looked into this, and for the first time I have some data to share with you. The second trend we see is that more and more researchers have multiple affiliations. So it's not just the one researcher with the one university address. More and more professors, academics have affiliations all over the place. So that tells you something actually about human talent development and probably also the institutional network dynamics going on in science. People having these different affiliations. So let's have a first look at the trends in world science. How did I define application oriented? I didn't look at each and individual publication. I simply looked at the journals in which publications are published and tried to find out whether or not these journals are more hospital oriented. So here we find a lot of people with hospital affiliations, whether or not you find journals with a lot of university evaluations, or they're published in journals where we see the industrial researchers, the R&D staff from companies. And these would then be the industrial research-oriented journals. So what I just did, I broke down science, world science, across these 3 categories, and simply tried to find out over the last 15 years, how have these journals developed over time in terms of increase or decrease of publications? Because that will tell you something about how science is moving into these 2 application-oriented domains, into the hospital sector or into industry. Okay, so here are the results. World science. And we see actually that in the last, say, 6-7 years, there's a huge increase of publications in journals that seem to be in this area of hospital-oriented research and application-oriented research. And the increase is much larger than academic research and even larger than industry research. So probably what we are seeing here, but there's a question mark there, is actually that science is becoming more hospital-oriented, more relevant in the medical and the life sciences area. And particularly, I would say also more relevant for clinical applications. But like I said, this is part of ongoing research, and we still have to look at the details here to find out what's actually happening here. But my gut feeling is that this is a true reflection of what's happening in science. A lot of money is going into the medical life sciences, and this is reflected in what we see in science, and probably there's an associated move towards applications in these areas. So how does this play out for universities? What do we see if we look at specific UK universities in terms of how their publication output is developing, broken down into these three areas? Well, we see that I've just picked 4 of the largest research universities in the UK. We see indeed this is the case. A lot of their publications, more and more of their publications are published in these hospital research-oriented journals. So this is the rise, or the further rise, of the medical and life sciences. And it outpaces university research orientation, and definitely outpaces industry research orientation. So it seems to be that these 4 big UK universities are sort of riding the tide, are indeed going along with this global trend. But interestingly, I checked, I have the data for about 1,000 universities. So my question was, okay, that's interesting. These universities look alike, but how would they compare to an elite university elsewhere? And if I say elite, probably many people would think of Harvard, and that is what I checked. So here are the statistics on Harvard. Harvard is in a very different dynamic. They do have a slight increase in hospital research orientation, but not much. And their university research-oriented publications is actually going down a bit. So very different dynamic. And the message here is, of course, you have to be very careful when you start to compare universities. And this is where context comes in, actually. Probably these UK universities are working within the same institutional, national context. That might also drive their developments, their trajectories. But for a huge university like Harvard in another country, other context, you see quite a different development. Okay, so that is sort of my first trend in world science, and how that sort of might play out in terms of metrics, might play out in terms of the differences we see between universities and how we have to interpret that kind of information. Okay, so the second trend is about scientific impact becoming increasingly multidisciplinary. This, again, mining my data, this is what I see. So over the last 15 years, you can see that if a publication is cited, it is cited by an increasingly large number of subdisciplines. It went up from slightly more than 3 up to almost 4.5 subdisciplines. And that is quite a significant increase. So again, we see this as one of the big pervasive changes in world science nowadays. And again, you can break this down by individual universities, which I did, and here are the 4 universities again, in the UK universities, and you could see if they publish papers at these universities, on average they have double the impact, the multidisciplinary impact of what we see in world science. So rather than this average of slightly more than 4, for example, Imperial College, London, their publications get cited by more than 8 subdisciplines. Quite a big difference. So in that sense, UK universities seem to be ahead of what we see worldwide. And again, let's have a look at Harvard. Harvard is at 10, actually. So that's quite a significant difference again. I'm not saying it's better than the UK universities, because in this particular case, you have to keep in mind that Harvard has a very different profile. And these profiles might actually determine the chance that publications are cited by a wider range of publications. So again, we will have to look more closely at the data. But the interesting thing for me is that, of course, there are, thank God, these big differences, which beg for explanations, and which we really have to find out what they actually represent. Okay, finally, trend number 3 then. So now we're looking at the multiple affiliations of researchers. And again, over the last couple of years, we see a clear upward trend, where in 2009, 25% of the publishing researchers had more than one affiliation. In 2014, it was almost up to 35%. So we see quite a significant rise of people, different affiliations. Not necessarily in a different country or different continent, could be very close by. Could be the university and at the university hospital, because several, or an affiliated hospital, we count these institutions at different universities, as different institutions. Okay, so let's look at the data again for the 4 UK universities I've selected, and you can see that it is more or less global average what we see. It's about 30%, slightly more, slightly less than 30%. So in a sense, they are just following general trends. And again, let's have a look at Harvard. Here's Harvard, much higher, 50% of the publications produced by Harvard researchers, they have at least 2 affiliations and probably more. One of the reasons for this is, but we're still looking into it, is that many of these cases are medical researchers with an affiliation at a hospital. And we all know that Harvard has at least 2 large hospitals, so we suspect that the hospitals and how they arrange these medical hospital systems has something to do with these differences. But we, like I said, we still have to look more closely at the findings in order to interpret what we see here. Okay, now I'm moving towards a specific subset of these multiple affiliates researchers, and I'm looking at those people who have a university affiliation and an affiliation in industry. And by industry, I mean for-profit organizations, but I exclude the profit-making universities and the for-profit hospitals. So this is basically about manufacturing industry and the services industries, corporate industry. Here's the trend for countries. The world trend, you can see that there's a slow upward trend. If you look at the blue lines, slightly up to 20% of the publications where we have a university address and we have an industry address actually relate to people having 2 affiliations. Slightly 20%, but there are huge differences between countries. For example, the Netherlands, in my country, 25% actually of the researchers producing these kinds of paper have dual affiliations. Many professors at the technical universities in the Netherlands, they are also employed by industry. They are heads of laboratories or R&D laboratories, and they have a part-time professorship. Quite high percentage. But if you look at the UK, that's definitely below world level and comparable to France and Germany. So, and again, I would say that some of the reasons for these huge differences have to do with institutional arrangements, perhaps even laws and legislation. And again, we are looking into this and trying to find out whether or not these results are context dependent or not. And that actually brings me to my final slide and to the research my colleague and I are going to do for this particular center for CG. We are going to look more closely at what's happening in the UK in terms of these academics who seem to be spanning boundaries between the university and industry, who are producing these university industry co-publications. And we're going to look more closely at them, at their publications. We're going to engage them in a survey questionnaire. We're going to interview these people. And hopefully we will have a better idea why specific UK universities are performing as they are, how that compares to other universities, to other countries, and how we should actually start to interpret this kind of information. And finally, perhaps somewhere down the line, this might help us to design an even better indicator for one of my ranking systems. Thank you very much for your attention.
Professor Ka Ho Mok from Leiden University in Hong Kong.
Good morning to all. Thank you very much and congratulations to Simon for taking this center for promoting global higher education research. And my topic today is about the quest for world-class status, challenges and prospects for higher education in Asia. And this morning, Dr. Jerrim, opened the symposium by highlighting about the issue relating to higher education access and the implication for financing and also equality issue. And my colleague just mentioned about ranking. No matter you like it or not these days, we cannot live without ranking. As an administrator in university and also as a reflexive academic, it's always a kind of dilemma that I am facing every day. I hate to talk about ranking, but ranking comes to us every day at our doorstep. So no matter you like it or not, ranking is something about our life. so long as some kind of ranking would be doing favor for us, we would like to marketizing it, benchmarking it. This is Forbes. 2015 came out with a ranking which focused on liberal arts college, and Lingnan University is being named as one of the top 10 in Asia. Don't ask me about the details. We just want the results so long as we are on the top 10. This is exactly the kind of psychology that we are facing in higher education today. I think the same happens not only in Europe, in the UK in particular, but also it happens, in Asia. When universities and government in Asia and Pacific, they are very keen to catch up, with the so-called leading universities in the West, or perhaps be influenced significantly by the Anglo-Saxon paradigm. And if you talk to government in Asia and Pacific, many governments would love to invest more so long as they can have some selected few of university being ranked high in whatever ranking exercise. So Professor, Robert, you helped the world by devising more ranking with a balanced view to help those people. They are working very hard on that. So I would like to share with you in my talk today talking about the trends, about the development trends in Asia, and then I will talk about the challenges, and at the end, I would like to share with you my thought about how Asian universities' development this day would have implications for UK universities. The first trend, I would say, because being latecomers of most of the universities in Asia, they just catch up in the last 30 and 40 years by expanding the system in order to create more opportunity for the students. Because one of the powerful cultural beliefs commonly shared among Asian universities in general and parents in particular is about education. So if you conduct any consumption research in Asia, one of the top priority from family income and expenditure is about education, education, and education. And parents' household income would be taking first about education because it's a kind of cultural belief that their offspring having good education can not only educated citizens, not only about jobs and opportunities, it's more about a cultural belief that they climb up the social ladder, and most important of all, they take families' glory. They bring glory to the family if they are well educated. So that's why if you look into what happened in Asia in the last 30 years, I would argue, particularly looking into the statistics by benchmarking about what Martin Troll has mentioned, many of the higher education systems in Asia and Pacific has gone through an elite university system or higher education system towards massive system. And even some economies in Asia has really reached about universal higher education system. Take the case about South Korea, Japan, Taiwan in particular. More than 90% of the high school graduates can be admitted to university in Taiwan. And in Hong Kong, we are still very small because only about 20% of our high school graduates can get into the 8 university funded by the public funding. But if you are talking about the private sources of funding, then it's more about 40%. But looking in South Korea, about 70%, Japan about 70%, and you can see that this is the kind of massification taking place in Asia. It gives you about the chart, about the expansion of higher education by region, indicated by gross enrollment rate from 1999 to 2013. The same happens in selected Asian countries and areas, again showing you about a very steady increasing trend, projecting about the enrollment rate has been expanding in this selected area, including South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Hong Kong, mainland China, and comparing to the red line is the global, the world, average. And what does it mean to us about, talking about, expansion, China being the second largest economy in the world, but in terms of higher education expansion, China does show a case that has expanded tremendously, significant. So taking back, in 1996, only 4% of the age cohort, 18 to 22-year-old cohort, in China could be admitted to university. But the national average is about 24 now. But this is only overall national average. But if you visit major cities like Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Beijing, and Shanghai, it's up to 70%, 80% of the high school graduate being admitted to university. So the number of the students enrolled not only in public university, but if you're talking about taking into the private college or what we call in China Minban, the Minban college jumped significantly from 1997 up to 2013. So this slide gives you the idea, projecting about the very steady trend. So what is then the implication about massification of higher education in Asia? I would say that there's a very important social and also economic development implication. If we do not plan well by massifying higher education without a careful mapping of the graduate employment, it creates a lot of tension and issue in Hong Kong and elsewhere in the Asia and Pacific. So my colleagues this morning mentioned about the fee-paying situation in the UK. It raised a lot of questions and debates. But there's no free lunch at all. Any system in the world, if you are talking about university enrollment rates is up to 80%. Take the case in Japan, South Korea, and even in China, more than 40% now. So this is not only about the government funding alone. It's not only about the taxpayers' contribution alone. We are talking about all these Asian systems. They are expanding themselves the slide that I just presented to you is about private and also public partnership. It's hugely about the private contributions by diversifying sources of funding. And I would say that marketization of higher education has become a regional trend in Asia and Pacific. And the issue is, where parents and families in Asia, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, they are very keen to invest in children's education. So I'm also contributing to the national economy of the UK because my kid is studying in the UK. And if you talk to parents, they're very keen to save up their money for sending the kids not only to local university. If they are affordable, they can send the kids elsewhere in order to get a better learning experience and better degrees for future development. So this is one of the major trends, if you like, about Asia Pacific in terms of higher education development. The second trend I would like to share with you is well related to my colleague just presented about ranking exercise. Governments in Asia are very keen about making their university more globally competitive. So that's why they selectively invest heavily in selected field of university to make sure at least in the country, in the national order, that at least a few universities can climb up the international and global university league table. So university questing for university or world-class status has a tremendous impact on East Asian universities. So taking the case of Hong Kong, following about a lot of practices in the UK, we've gone through various forms of exercise to improve and enhance the quality of education in Hong Kong, like the Quality Assurance Council, research assessment exercise, and government in Hong Kong. We have only Big 8 public university with about over 15 private colleges in Hong Kong. It's a kind of two-tier system. For colleges who want to collaborate with Hong Kong, most welcome. Being a global city, we welcome cooperation. But certainly if you're looking for high-quality partners, would be the Big 8, the public-funded university, rather than the private one. I'm not, disfavoring them because they are newcomer. The private enterprise just, evolved in Hong Kong since in the last 10 and 15 years. But the UGC-funded university, they are more public university, and government are very selective in this, 8 university to make sure they are successful enough. So in QS and Times Higher, at least out of 8, 5 of the university in Hong Kong is ranked top 100 in the world. Is something Hong Kong is very interested in about the ranking. Looking in other places like Taiwan, again, the government in Taiwan invests and concentrating funding for a few universities by promoting various kind of scheme here to make sure at least one or two universities, they can be ranked quite high in the university. You come out with the end talking about, stratification of universities in Taiwan. The same happens in China through the very famous project 211 and also 985. Basically, the essence of this project is to concentrate funding for helping only a few universities they can compete at a global level. Similarly, in Japan, they roll out the notion about flagship university project. And most recently, the Japanese government, make a public announcement that they hope that with a concentrating and strategic investment in a few universities, they can rank top 100 in the world in the next 10 years. In Malaysia and also in Singapore, they are very keen to compete by aspiring to become regional hub of education. In particular, Singapore, being very small, about 20 years ago, they pledged to become Boston of the East by inviting top Leach University all over the world to set up their branch departments or programs or university campus in Singapore to create the critical mass in Singapore to make Singapore really Boston of the East. After about over 20 years of investment, Singapore paid off. Now people will think about regional hub of education now is happening in Singapore. Similarly, we also find Malaysian government is very keen in providing more preferential policy to attract overseas partners to set up their branch in Singapore and also in Malaysia. So when you talk to friends, where are you working for? If you talk about Nottingham University, you must be very clear which one. Nottingham in the UK, or Nottingham in Ningpo, China, or Nottingham in Malaysia. Which one you want to make sure? Through this global networking system, students being enrolled in Nottingham, they are very good. They can mobile themselves from different campuses, but make sure which destination you are talking about. And NYU, if you work for NYU, has a Shanghai campus. Diu Kunshan also happens, in China now. So next slide give you a summary about different projects and schemes being rolled out by government in Asia. And they are making use of this kind of scheme to jumpstart, if you like, to make sure concentrating of funding or for university to make them world-class and compete world-class. Well, what's then the results? The Time Higher Education ranking shows 9 out of the top 10 universities in Asia ranked among the top 100 universities in the world. 5 of them features among the top 50 in the world, like the National University of Singapore, Peking University, University of Tokyo, Hong Kong, and also Tsinghua University. Similarly, QS World University Ranking also report consistent trend about at least some universities in Asia being ranked quite high in top 100. And Shanghai Jiao Tong academic ranking exercise here also reports the rise of university from Asia in the last couple of decades. And this table gives you the summary about how many universities being ranked in this sort of exercise. And the next one, this slide gives you about the Shanghai Jiao Tong ranking, reporting about more Asian universities, they are ranked higher. In terms of publication, and there's a lot of research, I just report one area I'm more familiar, it's about related to our Global Higher Education Center today. It's about people producing their outputs in higher education related outputs. One of the journal is an international reference journal, is Higher Education Policy. It comes out showing that people from Asia has contributed about 16%. Despite the fact that this journal is based in Europe, of course Europe would have the major lion's share, but it reflects to you Asian constitute quite a significant portion in terms of publication. It shows you about the rising, staff from Asia. What's then the implication about massification of higher education that I outlined, and also about ranking exercise that I just spoke to you? I would like to talk about the challenges of these particular two trends, and I'm observing the time limit today. There's a lot of different trends about. I just focus on two major trends today. The challenges would be about the labor market employment. And if you look into the situation that massification of higher education has produced more graduates than the market needs today. It's quite similar to what happens in Europe and even in North America. And of course, the unemployment rate of youth is not that bad, especially comparing to a different part of Europe, but still it becomes a social and political issue these days confronting Asia. And if you talk about a degree, does not really talk about assured employment, high earnings, and upward social mobility. So John opened the symposium today by pointing out about the social mobility. I just published a paper in British Sociology, Journal of Sociology of Education in January this year, reporting about what happened in Greater China area, like Taiwan, mainland China, and Hong Kong. We are approaching to a similar kind of trend, particularly, I hate to say that, with some friends from Taiwan here. The unemployment rate in Taiwan, particularly, graduate employment is becoming one of the major, political issues. President Ma Ying-jeou could not run well. It's one of his promise few years ago that is to improve the economy in general, and also promising the younger generation with a better, salary. But I think his promise, I'm so sorry that he could not deliver because oversupply of graduates, but that's not enough jobs. So you see, when I talk to people in Asia, many of all those graduate from undergraduate education, they defer unemployment by going to graduate school. It's not that they are very keen. I talked to the university student in Taiwan. Many of them told me that they don't like to continue, but they don't want to become unemployed after the first degree. So many students, go up to have that sort of problem about social mobility issue, and unintended, consequence comes with the growing pressure for creating job opportunities. You just imagine, say for the case about mainland China, annually, it produces over 7 million graduates. 7 million is about the total population about Hong Kong. You just imagine the magnitude. I can't think about how to resolve the problem. Of course, if you look into the statistics come out by the Ministry of Education in Beijing, there's no problem at all. But if you talk to individuals, they keep on delaying the unemployment by going to the graduate school. The same problem happens. So you come up with a huge issue not only in Asia, but confronting us today is about mismatch of skills. We are producing more, and more graduates. They may not have the right kind of skills which can meet the labor market needs with the changing market needs. So I'm glad that, Simon has led the center of this kind to do comparative work, to find ways for future, not only for research's sake, but also looking for policy, implication to advise and inform decision making in policy. And the massification of higher education, the expansion also raised about the concern about the quality and the equality. And I think John mentioned about inequality issue in the UK, but similar situation happens in Asia. I want to highlight here because many families, individuals, they contribute more to pay for education, but without a very guaranteed returns this state. And quite a number of research being conducted in Asia reflecting that the returns to individuals in terms of finance part is becoming a concern. And inequality has become an issue. The more you invest in the higher education, you will expect more return, but at the end, a lot of students in Asia, they are holding more loans, paying for university education, but without very satisfying returns in the labor marketplace. So in short, the massification and privatization of higher education have resulted in highly complicated, graduate employment and social mobility problems, especially when we are talking about looking not only about the graduate employment, but also about the property market, the housing market in Asia. If the economy is good and the property market is really, rocketing, shooting up, and many of the youth in Asia now, they are complaining about they have difficulty to find, sufficient income to buy the first-time buyer in terms of their property. housing. So housing issue, youth unemployment, and a lot of unhappy youth are growing in Asia. And all these issues discussed above have inevitably affected the academic profession, especially when we are talking about ranking these states. Then I would like to reflect upon that. So Asia should be congratulated for this effort for expanding higher education. But we should not drive reform to make changes without placing equally important emphasis on universities achieving excellence holistically. And I don't think that ranking is wrong. This is kind of driving exercise to make university perform. But ranking for whose interests we have to ask. And my friend just mentioned if we are playing out with ranking, if you are doing about science and technology, it would be easier to get the score in international ranking. But how about those universities? They have a specialism in humanity and social sciences. Then I would like to bring back the humanistic perspective in university governance, and transformation is really needed. I think this is very important. We have to be purposing about university education these days. And what we are doing today is for educating our citizens. Are we producing different classes of citizens, especially in the context about stratification of universities? And what sort of public policy interventions is needed? Shall the government not invest for the top university, but instead giving to those universities, they are receiving those students they really need to be helped, rather than concentrating their funding for making some universities already be very good and make them excellent. This is a kind of public policy, dimension that we have to consider. When we are doing education, we are questing for excellence, but shall we also think about excellence with a soul, bringing back about the arts and humanities, and making sure our citizens they are caring leaders with global vision, especially when we are doing about internationalizing higher education. My conclusion, when I presented to you about the trends and challenges confronting universities in Asia and Pacific, I would like to share with you my thought about collaboration for the UK. And I think most of the Asian universities are very opening-minded. We are very welcoming about cooperation with the UK and also universities all around the world. The rise of Asia in research grants and opportunities, and there are a lot of opportunity for international cooperation. Taking the case of Hong Kong, we have a lot of grants, opportunity open for international cooperation. I very much hope that UK institutions can work with us for this kind of project. And also the growth of quality students from Asia would mean that more and more students from Asia, they would love to go overseas for study. But it has a tremendous implication for immigration policy. I understand the current policy is not very favorable in the UK. And students coming from abroad, they all complain about the very stringent immigration policy. But I have sympathy on the government, but we think about we are global citizens. It's a borderless world. Well, we have to think about immigration then. The increase in choices for students from Asia for overseas students' destination is certainly have implications for UK universities. And the keen interest in developing transnational higher education, dual degree, joint degrees, and joint venture in Asia is a popular trend. For UK institutions, if you are very keen, I think there's a huge opportunity for you to go on in Asia. But of course, I understand about the QA system. It's very complex. I used to work in University of Bristol, working with overseas university in Asia. Are Asian university good enough? Okay, pick the top 100 then. The growing research capacity of Asian scholars and the intensification of competition for UK university, especially China government has invested hugely in research and development these days for helping university to become world-class, no matter how we define it. I think the rise of Asian university in global university table, there's a lot of implication for cooperation, but at the same time also intensifying competition. So I just want to conclude by saying that we should have a role differentiation among yourselves, and we have to talk about university development in context. Any good practice elsewhere could be a learning lesson, but cannot be just copy, because we are talking about policy learning rather than policy copying. So I congratulate UCL IOE for setting a research center for promoting global higher education research, which is needed. I'm very glad that Leiden University is part of the initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've got some time for questions for both Ka Ho and Robert. So,
Carl Allen, the massification of higher education, wherever it occurs in the world, is that just a bubble in waiting to be bursted?
Well, if I understand your comment and question clear, I think massification of higher education is something that I think the Asian governments are very keen to do that. With that understanding, they want to expand higher education for producing people with the kind of, attributes which can meet the challenge of the knowledge-based economy. But it's up to a point that, as I mentioned in my talk, without a careful mapping with the economic structure of individual countries, which could be, problematic. But I don't want to overstate about the economic imperative about education. Education is not only producing the labor force for economic drive, for development. Education is also having a lot of public good and also producing civilized citizens and a lot of other social dimensions. But if we judge upon about labor market needs and graduate employment, we must be very careful. But if we go beyond the argument of economic imperative, then this is a lot of things to say good thing about massification. But we have to manage about the expectation of parents and individuals. If not, we are creating a lot of angry, very angry youth in the community.
Thanks, Mark. William Locke from CG. A question to both of you, though it may seem more relevant to Robert initially, is about the tendency for the most influential rankings to encourage isomorphism, copying and mimicking and imitating the so-called best. And indeed, this may also be expressed in the notion or notions of world-class universities as some kind of singular thing. Indeed, many of the most influential rankings actually use the way in which they are calculated or compiled is about producing the best figure for the best university, and then, as it were, ranking every other university below that in relation. So they actually, in their processes, kind of encourage this. Although, of course, there is this greater diversity that you talk about in terms of what institutions are actually doing, although I'm not sure in terms of their stated mission there's that kind of diversity. So just some thoughts about this kind of, the influence of rankings in terms of creating less diversity perhaps than more.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that's a very good point. And in my slides, if you remember, diversity was mentioned a couple of times as one of the key objectives, you might say, of these modern 21st century rankings to capture diversity and to promote, in a sense, diversity. But it is going against the tide, because there is this tendency for all universities to become more alike, become global universities, to aspire to become one of the top 100. We've heard about that. And I don't think that's a very wise policy decision. Countries need diversity, higher education systems need diversity. And this whole idea of moving away from isomorphism is actually one of the driving forces of EU multirank. That is why we have introduced it as a scoreboard. That's why we have scores of variables, of metrics. And that's why we want to offer opportunities of all kinds, the possibility to enter into this particular ranking system. And it's a huge ranking system. By now, I think we have 1,200 universities. There's Harvard, but there's also liberal arts universities, there's music schools, everything is there. Everything is represented. And I think this should be a goal of all ranking systems, to cater for this kind of diversity. But you are right, some of the more influential ranking systems are very much focused on this idea of the league table, and taking Harvard, for example, as the leading example, which we should all aspire to. But from a policy perspective, at the university level or nationally, I don't think that's a very wise route into further development. But again, ranking systems have become very influential, and they are imposing their model, you might say, of higher education systems upon the world, and I don't think we should accept that any longer. Yeah.
Will, thank you for your comments and questions. I think university ranking could produce the potential danger about standardization. And my understanding about globalization, the more we know about globalization, is to appreciation of difference and acceptance about we are different. So if the humankind is so diverse, so why we need only one, pecking order to shape everyone's behavior? My colleagues, Rosemary Dean is here. We wrote something about in 2008, a paper talking about imitating in whose image. Are we talking about there's only one type of global higher education model, or are we putting into a plural form plus an S, but what does it mean about global? But in Asia, it's quite funny that, when we are talking about Asian people, we say globalization means internationalization. Internationalization means westernization. The extreme way of taking it is about Americanization. Then this is the way about globalization. So are we producing that sort of, logic? So I certainly think that, if every one of us just focus our energy for satisfying ranking, well, I don't mean that this is not important. That's important. It's a very good, parameter for us to effect what we have been doing. But most important of all, today we are doing education. We have to ask ourselves, are we, every university, every institution should have its own mission and vision. Are we fitting our purpose? Are we fitting our purpose? Well, we have to ask our students, do they enjoy world-class education? And are their learning experience great? But to be frank, if I were in your position, I found it hugely difficult to measure student satisfaction. And congratulations to my friend Bas Marvin, ranked top 10 in the country, student satisfaction. But that sort of satisfaction of the student side hasn't been captured prominently, in my opinion, about this also of global ranking. So if we are talking about future research and development, then this is one of the areas we have to think about. But I want to conclude by responding to you. From Asia, we all believe we are latecomers, so that's why we work extremely hard to catch up. But to upon that, if we just imitate with a so-called global model, then there's a potential danger about cultural imperialism. We undervalue about our own culture. Well, please bear with me. Perhaps I'm too strong about that. But it becomes some kind of concern among different continents. Are we talking about only one model, and why this model? And who defined the model? These are the issues being raised during the course of research. Thank you.
John Wood, Association of Commonwealth Universities. My last academic appointment was head of engineering at Imperial College, so I've seen the impact on one of your universities that you mentioned. But and following up this area of cultural imperialism, that's a constant thing we hear from the vice-chancellors of many of our universities, especially in Africa and India. Absolutely. But let me just turn this around, because some of these metrics, and we hear this from our vice-chancellors, are some of these metrics perverse in the fact that they're pressurizing universities to follow a non-sustainable line of inquiry. If we start to look at the Sustainable Development Goals, they're counter in many cases to those. And about 4 or 5 years ago at our conference in Hong Kong, John Yong, who used to be head of Open University, he said, how can we stop the implication that greed is the output of a university? And we've been looking at that. I don't know how you do it and how you get metrics to help get us back onto a much more egalitarian way. And if you want to hear my lecture on the soul of the university, I'm very happy to let you have it.
Yeah, well, this is again about diversity, of course, but now looking at it from a more developmental point of view. Perhaps I should add here and now that I'm also a professor in South Africa. So these are the issues I deal with in South Africa. Very different environment, a very different developmental stage. And you are right, they are simply adopting this, what you call Western model, on how they evaluate universities, how they allocate monies. And I don't think that's a very wise decision, because these countries have their own set of problems. Youth unemployment, fee problems in South Africa nowadays. So they need to adopt a very much customized, country-specific set of indicators. But the problem is, in terms of policy learning, the politicians and decision makers, they look at the Western countries. They see them as guiding examples, leading countries. So there's also a policy culture we need to change, in the sense that they have to get rid of this imperialism and have to take their own country as center of attention and as focal point. And there's only so much we can do with these rankings and with the instruments we have to change those policy cultures. And like I said, in South Africa, one of my research projects is actually quite interesting, because there I'm trying to introduce a new indicator of what I call inclusive innovation. So how do universities reach out to the community and co-develop innovations relevant for resource-poor communities? And it's an uphill battle. I can't convince decision makers to take this indicator on board. So there's a huge resistance there. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Johnny Rich from UMultirank. I was going to make a similar point to William's about isomorphism, except I wasn't going to use that word, mainly because I didn't know it. But I was going to also ask, given this distinction between league table style rankings and other rankings such as UMultirank, do league table style rankings make a net contribution? What do they support? Do they support university enhancement, student choice? Where is the benefit that they bring? And is it a net gain? If it isn't a net gain, then what should individual institutions do, given that this is a game that they may not want to play, but given that the game is happening, they don't want to lose it?
Okay, thank you, Johnny. Let's see if I can restore my voice. I think there's a net value there of having these what I call scoreboard rankings, because they cater for diversity. They open up to new models of how universities should profile or could profile themselves. So rather than fitting them in the mold of these league tables, these imperialistic league tables, they open up all these opportunities. And we are seeing some results in terms of the diversity of higher educations that have now signed up to UMultirank. So there is a demand there. And I think some ranking systems are actually meeting that kind of demand. At the same time, and this is again something we see in UMultirank, there is a lack of sensible, of relevant information. So if these universities, these schools of liberal art or music schools signs up, they expect to see their profile adequately represented in these ranking systems, and we're simply not there yet. So there is a measure of disappointment, and there is some degree of retracting well, like I said, disappointment on the side of the universities. So this, again, is something of a matter of dialogue between ranking developers, people like me, and the stakeholders. We have to convince them that there is added value. We think there's added value, but we still have to convince them that that's the case. And they can expect more added value in the next couple of years. So dialogue with stakeholders, with users, is really essential to push this idea of more sensible, more responsible ranking systems in the near future. Yeah.
Well, thanks for the comment. I think I'm glad to meet Robert in person. So I'm very pragmatic. We cannot, doing education this day, we can say goodbye to ranking. They come back every day. So I think my university has thought about that, by leveraging about the recent liberal arts, ranking, by forming some sort of, alliance, working with those people. They are having a very strong orientation of liberal arts education together for promoting liberal arts education regionally and even globally. So I hope that we can convince Robert and similar kind of, ranking agency to develop another separate, lead table. I hate to lead table because we're cycling about the experience, but at the end of the day, we need some kind of tool for reflecting upon, other strengths. So I think I'm very pragmatic. If Robert would agree, then we can work together under this particular research center to do something for promoting humanity and social sciences. And they are very important too, as part of, higher education, enterprise. Deal.
On that note, we need to round up session, so can we show our appreciation, please, for Robert and Carl? All the presentations from today will be on the CGHE website. I'd like to introduce now Simon Marginson, Director of CGHE, to close off the conference.
Thank you, Mark. Higher education is a tremendous human enterprise, and at its best it fosters the best of modern human sensibilities and the most considered solutions. Our future hangs on its effectiveness, its independence, its quality. Now with CGHE we have a tremendous opportunity to help to develop higher education in a country where there's never enough money, but the intellectual cultures are very strong. When I say we, I mean not just the research staff in CGHE itself, but everyone here. You can see that CGHE is beginning to gather the infrastructure, the talent, beginning to establish the national and global networks. The website, which Anna is going to develop, is going to be very important. And in the first instance, it's I think, incumbent on us in the research team to deliver, to start to produce important data and interpretations and policy applications. But we know that to take this opportunity to the full, we need your active engagement. We need it not only to develop impact of the research on knowledge and on policy and practice, we need it to develop the knowledge itself. It's good to see so much capacity, so much wisdom, so much social science capacity in this room in relation to higher education studies. Many of the doyens of the field are here at the moment. We see all of you as playing a significant and growing role in the centre. We want to include you, of course, in our seminars, in our projects, and we want to support your ideas, your initiatives, and to help you build projects as well. Keep an eye on www.researchcg.org, our website. Sign up to our newsletter. Come tomorrow, where we continue this conversation at the launch of CGHE, and we focus specifically on the impact of social science research on higher education. Tomorrow, 1 o'clock, Brunei Gallery Lecture Theatre. Lunch is at 1 o'clock, and the seminar actually begins at 1:45. Come to the Gary Rhodes delivery of the first Burton Clark Lecture on Higher Education on the 14th of March here at 6 p.m. It remains for me to say thank you to Carolyn and Anna for the launch and for everything else that's happened so quickly and so well in the first few weeks. Thank you to my colleagues in the Management Committee of CGHE who've been the engine room of everything that's happened so far. Claire, William, Peter, Paul, Gareth, Francis and Alan. and all of the CG researchers, or CIs, as we say in ESRC speak. Thank you to the doctoral students who've helped with today, Eliza and Di, Lulu, Lorena and Andrea. Thank you to Mark again, who is such a good friend to CG and I think to higher education. My personal thanks to Mike Shaddock, Rajani Naidu, who's not here, she's in South Africa today, and Heather Eggins, who helped me make the transition from Australia to the UK. And thank you to my wife, Anna Urevna, always Anna. Thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you soon. And please stay with us for lunch.